Half hour, this is your half hour call. Half hour call. Hello, and welcome to Half Hour Call, the podcast where we talk about all things theater, TV, films, basically entertainment in general. I'm your host, Rich Kless, and today we're going to geek out a little bit on the tech side of things, and we're going to dive into the audio world today. Our guest today is a production manager for cultural and special programs at Elon University. He's worked as an audio engineer, production manager, and designer for various touring acts and corporate clients throughout the US, Canada, and Europe. He's a member of the Audio Engineering Society, USITT, and the Event Safety Alliance. He's been working professionally for over 40 years and also has been as a consultant. Besides his passion for microphones, especially ribbons, he's also well-versed in wireless coordination and networked audio. Please welcome Rick Earl. Rick, thanks for being here today.
Hey, you're welcome, Rich. Good to see you.
Good to see you. First question I'm asking all of my guests as we go through this podcast. Go back to the beginning. What made you want to be an entertainer?
An entertainer. I don't know if I feel that I'm an entertainer, but
I think we all are. I think every one of us is an entertainer in our own way. I've always said if I'm entertained, doing my job right, nobody knows I'm there. But that's entertainment right there.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. So, it's really hard to pinpoint the exact moment, but I would say one of my strongest memories, I would say I was about in sixth grade. My Aunt Celeste took us to Radio City Music Hall for the Christmas Spectacular the day after Thanksgiving, and I kind of remember the show. I think I more remember the organ coming out of on the elevator and the big turntable, and so to me the excitement was not really the show as much as what made the show happen. And then from that point moving forward, I just I think I started with like children's theater, and that was at a university, so I was doing university level shows and hanging out with doing college shows when I was still in high school. And then it just kept being in those places. So it's been something I've really been doing for a long time, and it's just fun. And like you said, to geek out. I mean that's most of it. I think I played drums a long time ago, and I just have no desire because I had more fun with a recorder than I did the drumsticks.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I can tell you that in the technical world for me, I was, I grew up on Long Island in New York. I was all about acting, but then all of a sudden I was offered to stage manage in high school, and I was like, what's that all about? And it was like, oh, this is pretty cool too. And then realizing there's way more jobs in the tech world than there is
Right. Yeah.
So before we get into like mic selection, which is one of the main topics I want to talk to you about, in the intro, I mentioned that your passion for mics, especially ribbons. Yeah, what's a ribbon mic?
Well, this one's a ribbon that I'm talking to you in now. But so ribbons have been around for quite some time. I think most people are kind of used to seeing the big RCA, with Bing Crosby or Frank Sinatra, or that big
Right.
rectangle, cool looking mic. But what's really cool about the ribbon is, um, so
I lost your audio. Hold on.
that's all right. Do you hear me now?
I got you back. Yeah, no.
Okay.
I just heard that. Sorry about that.
So I don't know. It said it was a problem on my side. So
Okay, no worries. All right. So you were saying what's a ribbon microphone and going into that about Sinatra and all that kind of stuff.
all right. So yeah. So we've seen them. But what's kind of unique about the ribbon is that it's basically a tiny, very thin. Not really tiny. Some of them are a couple inches long, but it's a very thinner than my hair.
Or mine.
Aluminum ribbon suspended between two magnets. And so when the sound causes that ribbon to vibrate, it actually is cutting through the lines of flux of the magnets, and it creates a current that travels through the ribbon. So it's very low mass, very true, reproduces almost all the frequencies. And you don't have all the other things that go into, I don't have a coil like on a dynamic microphone, so we keep the mass low. I don't have that capacitance that we have with and the high tension that you would have on the diaphragm for a condenser microphone. So it really, it's just got this beautiful, warm, silky sound that I just enjoy, and the more I play with them, the more I like them.
So talk to me a little bit about just so that's a ribbon microphone. What are some other kinds of microphones that are available to the theater and any entertainment world?
Well, so the ribbons have, like talked about. I mean, mostly in live sound, you're going to see a combination of dynamics. I mean, the sure SM58 would be the most common one.
That's this one.
That's right. What you're talking into, and it's been around. Gosh, almost as long as we have. It was mid '60s when they developed that microphone. And it's just they're good solid microphones, and dynamic mics they're hard. They're not easy to make to sound good. There's a reason why everybody compares their mics to SM58s.
Right.
And then you have condenser microphones. So it's basically two plates. One of them's charged, and when it vibrates, it changes the capacitance of the circuit, which causes a little current to be made. And those are great. As well. They're all great. They all have their purposes. So in Broadway, you're going to see miniature condenser mics, or not see them because they hide them well in costumes. Sometimes you'll see the tiny little headset mic or up in their hair.
Right.
It's kind of hard to get a ribbon to do that. They're a little bit big for them.
Okay.
And at the same time, Roger Daltrey is going to swing that 58 around and at the end of a mic cable, and you're not going to. Most mics aren't going to be able to stand up to that kind of abuse. So, part of it for me is, does it sound good? But part of it for me is, what's going to get the most out of the performer, because that's what's really ultimately going to make it sound good.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've always been told, like with the 58 that I'm talking into, I've always, heard it referred to as the workhorse. You could drop it from a building, plug it in, and it'll still work because it's just so compactly designed in terms of the aesthetic of it and everything, and it'll work no matter what. Although it's not true. I've had 58s go out.
yeah.
Usually on the opposite end of the microphone where the cord plugs in that starts to fail. But like you said, Roger Daltrey swinging it around, that's what he's doing it with. He's not going to do that with a ribbon mic because that's not going to hold up in that kind of situation.
No, and even ones that could hold up, the one I'm talking into right now, it could probably hold up to most of that, but it's just a little awkward. It's not
Right,
it's not designed for that.
right, exactly.
And then the big RCAs, they weigh 8 pounds, and that's quite the workout.
So who is first? Do you know who first was using ribbon mics over other things? Was it in broadcast or was it more in theater or film that was the ribbons became more popular?
Uh, so to go back, it's hard to. I can't pinpoint. I should be a better historian on that. I should have done my homework. But so the one that we're used to the most is RCA. And then I just did a little thing on for my Insta a couple months ago where we talked about electro voice. So in the early days of broadcast.
Your audio cut again. Sorry about that.
All right, can you hear me now?
There we go. I got you.
All right, so I changed it. I think I bumped my computer. I think I have a bad jack on my interface,
Oh,
and
okay.
I can't. So we're gonna leave it at this, and the sound quality will go down. Is that still sound okay to you, or?
It sounds great right now. Yeah, when I can hear
Okay.
you. And of course, we have audio problems when we're talking about audio day, but
Yeah, that's always the case, right?
and it's perfect. And I love it because that's the world we live in, is you have to deal with these.
Yeah.
and we have to overcome and adapt these things all the time. And that's what we do. That's what makes you the pro you are. I do the same thing of just work through the problem and move it on. So,
Yeah, we have backups. I have my phone sitting right here just in case. So if we had to switch over to that because something else crashed, we'd be good to go. So
right. So you're talking about Sinatra days of ribbon mics, I think it was.
right. So in early broadcast days, ribbons were one easy to make. They sound good. And comparatively easy to make to a dynamic or a condenser. A lot more had to go into those. Condenser microphones required some tube circuitry in the early days. They were there, but so the ribbons were pretty ubiquitous all the way around. And then as in the 40s, uh, Electro Voice kind of moved away from them because they developed some other stuff. RCA, which owned NBC, so RCA was they kind of controlled it from both ends, right? They made the equipment,
Right, right.
they created content, and then they sold content. They had a record label. They had so in a lot of ways that worked. And then the people that weren't NBC or RCA were using Electro Voice and other brands of mics. So a lot of people were using them um, in film, in especially when the talkies came for music, for broadcast until about the 40s. World War II came around. They had to come up with alternative mics for pilots and broad aircraft. So we had carbon mics and some of those other mics that were used. And then I think Electro Voice kind of developed a material for making diaphragms for dynamic mics, and they kind of abandoned ribbons. And then it's about the 60s, I think, was when the last ribbon kind of rolled off of RCA's production line.
Okay.
And there was some stuff in between. Some people had some, sure had some for a while. The BBC still, so the Coles 4038, the one that looks like a kind of like a waffle iron, that's been in production since the 50s when they developed that. But a lot of it fell off, and then company, West Dooley with AEA and Royer, and another company was called Crawley and Tripp that then sold out to Shure. There was this resurgence of ribbons in the 80s,
Okay.
and um, you're starting to see more and more of them. So a friend of
Okay.
mine's engineer with on tour. I think he's using
Okay.
seven mics out there, and Sturgill Simpson is the artist. So you're starting to see them more.
Gotcha.
See more.
Gotcha. So let's just talk about mic selection in general, not necessarily ribbons, but like I'm going to give you kind of two scenarios that for me relate the most. The first is in the context of, say, a musical theater show.
Hmm.
What are you thinking about in terms of the different mics you're using? Let's like start with the actors. What are you looking at there before you choose which microphone you're going to use?
Well, so it becomes for me it's part of the whole design process, right? So um, what are we trying to keep the illusion? Does a microphone matter?
Okay.
Or are we right? So, but I mean that's part of the process, and it's kind of it doesn't really matter because it's the same mic. So either we use a headset, which gets the mic in a nice placement where we love it, uh, but some people don't like that look. So then we're looking at something we can hide in the costume or the hair or behind the ear and that type of thing. So that generally, we're going to mic the actors directly. To me, that's what I prefer.
Would you say that like right now, I think there's a few musicals. I want to say I know of one. I can't think of another one, but in the past, I've seen more of a rock opera. They actually choose to go with like a wireless handheld as opposed to what's the benefit of that for something, a situation like that? Jesus Christ Superstar, I've seen 100 times with, people running around with handheld mics and not using body mics. What's the advantage there in terms of the rock opera scene, do you think?
Well, you get the advantage of that microphone. So a small miniature condenser mic. It's fixed distance. It's kind of naturally, but you don't get any mic technique out of it. I mean, if you got a good singer that knows how to work a microphone,
Right.
you get up close, you get all that proximity effect, you get that nice full intimate sound. You can pull off and wail into it. I mean, it's a rock and roll mic. I mean, that's why we use them.
Right.
So if it's a rock opera, again, if I'm doing Pirates of Penzance, maybe not. Um, uh, but if I'm doing something like Jesus Christ Superstar or Hair or even We Will Rock You, uh, I think it's a great choice because that's what it is, and I think the audience can accept it. So I think some of it is what the audience is willing to accept, and then the concept from the beginning of what it's gonna take from a director's vision, producer's vision of what they want the show to look like and that and feel like.
Do you consider where the music's coming from in that setting? Like, is it if it's, do we have a full orchestra or are we doing tracks? Is that matter in terms of your mic selection for an actor at that point?
A lot of times, yes, and that's and also experience level. So yeah, I'm working at a university. I don't do a whole lot with music theater. They have their own sound designer that does a lot with them, but I do work, as you know, I work a lot with the students that might be working with these shows. And so you have to realize that, orchestra sitting in the pit and you're standing over that pit, the loudest sound of the mic wins.
Right.
So if you have a singer that's not moving a lot of air, sometimes it's difficult. So that you have to get creative with placement and working with them on technique, and that's a lot of it. Right? Is technique is huge. No matter if it's a fixed mic like on somewhere on their body or a handheld, technique is huge. Performance is huge, and then their comfort level with that mic. So if they've never had a microphone in their hand before and don't know how to use it, a lot of times they're not very comfortable with it, and their performance is not as good. So I think a lot of times, it's easy when I was working with rock bands. I mean, they were just natural with them. But when you work with younger people, especially that haven't had much experience with mics, they don't totally understand it, and so there's a lot of coaching that has to happen with it as well.
Okay. Let's talk about a little bit about like the band, say in a musical theater setting. Um, does their location always come into effect for you in terms of I've had a couple of experiences where we got them in the orchestra pit, which is the traditional, but then you also have them on stage at times. And I've also done shows where they were in another building. What's the is there a point where you go, okay, well, where they are is going to affect which mics I'm going to use for this band?
Uh, Not a lot,
Okay.
mainly for the fact that so I mic everything. Especially all right in the pit, especially where it's really tight. I'm gonna get as many mics in there as I can, which I know sounds stupid and counterintuitive, but
Yep, not at all.
you can't move around a pit once everything's in there. And so I can always turn a mic off, but I
Right.
can't turn on a mic that's not there.
There you go.
And I don't want to stop a rehearsal or stop a show or whatever it takes to make that mic happen. And then you're patching at the last minute. So I mic everything. So with that in mind, I may want to do, sometimes certain theaters, the pit is pretty loud coming out of the pit.
Mhm.
Certain places, it is a pit, and
Yep.
um, I'm glad I've mic'd everything. I toured with a show where we had a band in a pit, and it was, I think, for the most part, I ended up, I think about 3 shows in, or uh, I think I ended up putting in a secondary set of area mics because there were some live pits where I still want to bring in a little bit of presence, but I really didn't want as much as I was getting out of the direct mic. So I had a little bit of a choice. Um, but I think for the most part, if I can isolate them, it's better. But I will go back to what I stated before. It's all about the performance. So sometimes there's that connection with the performers in the orchestra of the band, and some of it's eye contact, some of it just is feel.
I think most engineers would agree with you with the idea of, I'd rather put a mic there and not use it than not have it. I know there was a tour I was on and went into this one theater where like it was a proscenium house, but the pit area was only literally a step down from the audience level. So they were basically on the same level as the audience. And halfway through the show, I was, going through and an audio guy comes up. He's like, the pit mic's on at all for the show.
Mhm.
Okay. They were just so like he was like, I can't control them. They're so right there in front of the audience. I'm just trying to get the actors over them. And nothing I can do can help in this space.
Right.
He's like, yeah, I set up all that stuff and I'm not using any of it. Because in that situation, that was the best way to go about it, is just let them, mix themselves, as it were. Um, so let's go over to more of again, a concert setting. Again, more of the differences between like a jazz band setup and again a rock and roll concert. Talk a little bit about what are the things you're again looking for there, in terms of what you're going to choose to do. I know some of that you're not really looking at mics at all. You're looking at direct inputs for a lot of instrumentation. But are there times that you're like, no, I'm going to mic that guitar and the Fender amp because it sounds better? Why would you do that?
Well, I tend to do a lot of so with let's do jazz. Jazz is kind of the easier one. So I do a jazz band. Again, I still mic everything. I think I want to say the last jazz band concert I did, except for the kick and the snare, it was all ribbons. Um, I don't, and people think I do mic the kick, but I deal with kick differently. So a lot of it goes to genre. So I mic the kick, but kick and jazz tends to be more of an accent thing. It's we're not looking for that, breaking two by fours at 20 paces like you are with rock and roll. Um, but I'm looking for that natural sound. The band mixes themselves. So ribbons can be this just nice natural sound. I can kind of blend things. And a lot of it for me is just that balance. There's that. I think one of the things that people don't really think about too much. I wish I try to point it out is when you're in a theater, especially any proscenium theater, the band is on stage, and your audience is out in the audience. Um, they're in two different rooms.
Right.
Uh, And so the band may be sounding great when you're right up on the band, but then when you walk out in the house, they're in a different room, and some stuff carries better than others. So I'm mixing more for a balance in that type of situation. And rock and roll, that's kind of goes all out the window because it's the show is amplified. It's meant to be amplified. It's meant to be, artificially bottom heavy, right? Our kick drum is not really how it sounds. We add that, we scoop out the mids, add some bottom end, get those subs moving. So how we do that a lot depends on the sound, and then I'm looking for texture. So say with a guitar, uh, I'm almost generally mic the amp almost because for the most part most guitarists that's the tone they're looking for. But I might mic it with two or three different mics uh, because then I can mix those textures together depending on what's going on. So if it's a rhythm guitar, say I got someone playing lead. When they play lead, the body falls out. They're playing
Right.
lots of notes. So the rhythm guitar and the bass come up in the mix. But I don't want them to walk over top of what they're doing. So I may choose a different mic just to fill out the mix, but the balance to not walk over the guitar lead. And same with the bass. With the bass, I use the rec box, but I also tend to use a mic on their speaker for the same reason. I can get a uh, different texture out of the mic.
What talk about the difference between selection of a mic and a placement of a mic? How do you get musicians to understand, okay, this is the ribbon mic, but this is where you need to play as opposed to just hoping you get close enough? Like what is your rap with musicians for saying this is what you need to do to get this good?
Well, that's the better part about most of the ribbons that I use is that they have a really that's why I like them. They have probably one of the smoothest polar patterns of any microphone out there, except for maybe an omnidirectional microphone. If you look at the polar pattern for say a AEA 44, which is like the basically RCA 44, it's this beautiful, perfect figure eight, but it's also almost perfect from a frequency standpoint. So you get very little drop off to the sides, as opposed to that 58. If you take that 58 and start turning it, as you're talking into it, as you start moving off to the side, the high frequencies fall off. So I have a harder time actually working with people with non non ribbons, because they tend to be there's a little bit more grace with a ribbon. But I mean, how many times have you? I know you've done this because I know where you work. How many times have you done something with someone that doesn't know how to use a microphone? You give them a wireless handheld and they're holding it and they're pointing the mic away from them, and you can't hear them, and everybody's like, turn them up, and you can't turn them up because it's just going to feed back. They're basically talking in the back of the mic. So mic technique with singers is it's kind of tough, but if I'm doing if I'm doing jazz band, for the most part we mic it. If I have a problem with a musician, then we'll talk to them. I have there's a trumpet player I know that likes to play down. uh, so that's fine if I know that that's the case, and we're going to move that mic into that position. But I did one. This was one that was this is a bad mic choice on my part. But I was doing a show with a touring jazz band came through, and I picked my mics, and we did sound check. And they did basically for the sound check, they did starts and stops of every song. So the trombone player was also the band leader, would come down front and he would sing some and he plays trombone some, and it was great for starting stops and for sound check. Then we get into the show and he starts playing and he's moving all over the place, and I had used a directional ribbon as opposed to a bidirectional ribbon with that big wide pattern, and I lost half of his playing because he'd just move in and around out of the mic. So I didn't see what I should have talked to him more,
Right.
and see what was happening. So, but so a lot of it is really kind of working with people. I had
And
another.
I can say,
Right.
you said, based on where I work, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I'm actually in process of developing a microphone technique workshop, not for students, but for faculty and staff, because I can't tell you, and this is just kind of switching away from concerts and theater, but just lectures of people who just don't know how to talk into a microphone is just it's epically bad out there. And the number of people who just they are constantly I've had really famous speakers who they're just constantly, one of them I know is just constantly grabbing the head of the mic in the middle of their thing, and that's all you hear is what I'm doing right now is just that, and you're like, please stop doing that. You don't hear what we hear, which is every time you touch the microphone. So stop doing that. And I know it's subconscious, but there is, and then you get that. Of course, you get those people out there who are like, I don't need a mic. And I go, yes, yes, you do. You do need a microphone, especially in this day and age, because 9 times out of 10, in the events we're working, we're also live streaming things. So that's going to a totally different audience who's not in the room with you. So you need that microphone for them, if nothing else, and teaching and educating people that, it's not just about what's right there and that kind of thing. So it's funny you mentioned that, because it's an epically bad problem in my opinion.
Yeah, and
No idea how
it's
to use
interesting.
microphones. And musicians who don't know how to, you put a microphone in front of them and they go, what am I supposed to do with that? And like, just play like you normally do. That's all.
Well, it's funny. I had done a show this a few years ago, but I had mic'd up. It was percussion, hand percussion, and I mic'd it up, and we get into sound check, and I'm like, what is wrong? I'm like, nothing sounds right. And I look up, and all the mics have been moved, and this is a podcast, so people can't see this mic, but it's a end address mic, but it's got holes down the side. So some people think it's a side address, and I'll see people move it sideways. I'm like, no, you're talking to the end of this mic. but they had done the same thing, and they thought it was, so they moved all the mics because I thought they knew that they thought I had done it wrong. I had to go back. You're doing it wrong. I'm like, no, I'm not.
Right.
uh, so sometimes they're armed with a little bit by how it looks. That's one of my things I used to love to do with students is I'll pull different mics out of the box. Tell me what kind of mic this is. It's a condenser, it's a ribbon, it's a dynamic,
Right.
and 9 times out of 10, I'm going to have one that's going to fool them because they just don't know, and you can't tell, but just by looking at it. But uh,
You talked
so
about
it is.
patterns
Go
before.
ahead.
You talked about the patterns before. What are some of the patterns around the microphones that are most common, do you think?
All right, so the ones that we use. So omnidirectional is kind of that one of kind of the most common, and that's basically you have a uh, you have a diaphragm with nothing on the backside of it. So it's basically any air pressure changes anywhere around it is going to
Yeah, if
uh,
you're drawing a diagram for folks, it would be the microphone head, and then most people draw like a circle around it, and they'll go, you'll
right. So
receive sounds from anywhere in that range.
so if you imagine blowing up a balloon and putting the mic right in the middle of that balloon, that's the
Right.
way that would react. And so those, the miniature mics that we see, miniature lavs, so some of those are directional, but a lot are omnidirectional. The ones you see on actors and stuff in Broadway, we encounter those a lot. You don't encounter too much out in the field. Occasionally, a news reporter, the microphones a news reporter will be omnidirectional. Um, and then you get into a ribbon microphone, and it's a figure of eight. So I have the ribbons in this free space, and so you have um, sound coming from the front of the microphone, or the front of the microphone is going to cause the ribbon to move, and sound coming from the back of the microphone is going to cause the ribbon to move. But if your sound is coming directly in from the side, it it basically is equal on the front and the back. So it's kind of, if I'm pushing you one way and someone's pushing you the other way, you're not going to go anywhere, right? So same thing happens with that. So that's a figure of eight. And then the variances from that become, how do we control that? So if you take your SM58, if you unscrewed the cap, you'd see where the diaphragm is, and you see all these little holes around the backside of it. And basically what's happening now is sounds coming into the back of the microphone, and we slow down the time enough so that it makes it directional. And so we would call that a cardioid pattern, is what the 58 is, and it's called cardioid because it looks kind of like a heart shape. So now we take our balloon, and where we blow it up, we would push the microphone into that, and so you would kind of get this heart shape
Oh, the shape
pattern.
of the part.
And then as we start narrowing that pattern, so we get hypercardioid, supercardioid, and then shotgun, we start narrowing that pattern. Uh, it gets more directional on the front, but at the same time, because of physics and all the other fun stuff of there's no such thing as getting something for free. Uh, you start getting a lobe off the back, so you have to be careful about those other lobes on the microphone. So supercardio microphones so you go from like an SM58 to a Beta 58. You have that rear lobe, so now you have to watch out for your monitor sitting. So I can put a monitor right behind a 58, but a Beta 58, I really want to move my monitor off to the side a little bit,
Right.
so that I can get some volume. But I do the same thing even with ribbons. I can do monitors with ribbon as long as it's sitting in the null of that microphone. So once you understand your patterns and your microphone patterns, you can do a whole lot to control the sound on the stage.
Right.
Right. So it's not just what was the microphone pointed at, because basically if you point the microphone at the source, it's going to sound, you're going to pick up that sound, but also what what's on the backside of that microphone, or what's in the null. Uh, so you got a lot of drums. You probably heard this with a lot of rock bands. We're dealing with a rock band in a small venue. The lead singer's mic is that's your overhead. That's all cymbals, right?
Right.
So how do we control that? So sometimes it's a matter of kind of rearranging things, or looking at things from a different perspective. Uh, so
All right. So I guess the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the mic selection process is again, what is is there a one particular major factor you're going into any particular show with, or is just everything situational?
Um, I would say everything is pretty situational.
Aside from
Um,
the budget, of course, is always.
yeah, the budget. Uh, I'm gonna again. I want as many mics as I can get. It's great. I love some of the new technology. You and I both are. I know use some of the new same consoles, and you're looking at the ability to easily do 128 channels or more. So I those high channel counts, and they're not totally necessary for a lot of shows, but um, but there are times where I'm not sure, so I might put two or three microphones out just because I don't know what I want. And a lot of it is I make sure I'm trying, and I encourage students and the people that work for me to try. Is you kind of start building a library in your head. This is how this sounds. This is how I want to like it, and so that experience really becomes a whole lot of what makes things work. And so sometimes, a snare drum SM57 is it's the go-to. It's the first one out of the box. Um, but there are times where it just doesn't sound right. And
Doesn't it's not the right selection. Yeah.
right. And so I worked with an artist not a few years ago now, but he was an older drummer. He and his brother were both kind of big time rock drummers, and they kept us kit really tight. And I asked him, I said, man, these things are so tight, I can barely get a mic in here. And like, yeah, we both had rotator cuff surgery because they were doing that, the old big rock and roll stuff and swinging from the rafters with their sticks. Uh, I couldn't get a 57 out on the snare if I wanted to. There was just no space for it.
Right.
So that's part of it. But and there's other times where it's what am I trying to get out of the drum? So what if I'm making for jazz? I want to listen to the kit, so I tend to rely on my overheads. If I'm miking for rock, I'm going to close mic the toms, but then different toms. So I have small dynamics, but I also have condenser mics because sometimes the tom just doesn't respond the same. So when you're close miking, we don't think about it because generally you're hitting the drum, you're a couple feet away from the drum, but we're putting these mics inches from the instrument,
Yep.
inches from a speaker. You don't listen to a guitar with your head in the amp.
Yeah.
uh, but that's how we're miking it.
Yeah.
So understanding what's happening at that level, and that really just comes from experience. So
And you have
uh,
plenty of that, I can tell you that right now. I know that for a fact.
yeah, but I try to make sure that my students get it too. We uh, I think you and I know that there's some history there with both of us that um, you know we try to make sure that they can try different mics, and
Right.
if the students have earned the trust, I know they'll take care of it. It's like, hey, I want to do this. Okay, yeah,
Yep.
take what you want. Come
Absolutely.
back and report. Tell me what you found out.
Yep. All right, Rick. Well, I think that's our episode for today. I really appreciate your insight into all of this and digging into this. And hopefully we'll get into some more geeking out subjects in the future. I know that two fans around here that know you well have been looking forward to this episode. I'm referring to my sons who studied under Rick at Elon. And they're both professional sound guys now. So thanks for coming.
And you're welcome. I just have to say, I did. In fact, Tyler was talking to me this weekend. We were actually doing some wireless stuff over the weekend.
Yep.
And so he said that he put in where I'm honored that you asked me, but he said that
Yeah, he's like, it's gonna be a good one. I could tell.
yeah.
A
So
lot to get out of him because he didn't talk much. All right. Well,
is that
thank
the
you
same
for
one I know?
joining. I appreciate it, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Half Hour Call. And if you like what you heard, please hit subscribe and share with other people. And we'll see you next time, and keep the faith.
Places, places, please. This is Places.